Hi, my dragons. Welcome to Lecture 2 of Intro Psych, and today we're going to talk about, finish the intro, and we're going to go on to a little bit about research, which is Chapter 1, very little bit. I just want you to skim that chapter, and because we're going to talk more about that later, and we have a whole course, research methods, that many of you are required to take, so I don't want to go into it in too much detail because there's too much in Intro Psych that we have to cover as well. And then we're going to start biological basis of behavior, maybe. Let's see how this works out, okay? So give you a little bit of housekeeping update. Today I had my COVID-19 test, looking for Rona. So hopefully that'll come out negative. They told me to expect results in 4 to 6 days. Today's Monday, so I'm hoping that that's closer to the 4 side than the 6 side. And then we'll be able to resume classes in person on Monday, assuming it's all negative. Well, so we'll see, okay? So we're still on class online this week, so I'm putting these videos on Lecture 2. So I'll also put the lecture guide up there for you to do. Follow along with it. So you should print out the lecture guide, and as I lecture, you should fill in the stuff. So we are continuing with the intro chapter when we looked at developmental and emotional memories, and there's 5 different components to each one. First of all, a biological component. So there are things that happen in your brain structure, different parts of the brain which we talked about last time that were responsible for getting your attention to a particular memory, deciding that, hey, this is important. It activated the amygdala, and then the amygdala passed it on to the hippocampus. We talked about that on the last video. There's all kinds of emotional responses that are very clearly in the biological, neurological component of psychology. So a lot of psychology does deal with biology and neurology. There's even a field in psychology, a section of psychology called neuropsych. So that's very interesting. The cognitive component, which is how we perceive, how we feel, how we think about things, how we develop attitudes, how we make decisions. So there's that. The social part of memory, which, what was the setting? Who were you with? Where were you? Were you out in a crowd? Were you alone? Were you at a particular place like a library or a museum or whatever you were at? Okay. Then there's also the cultural part of memory. I think we discussed this a little bit last time as well. What do people in your cultural group, be it race, ethnicity, economics, geographical location, whatever it is, how do they view what happened? How do they view those memories? So there's the social component, the cultural component, is number 4, and then the developmental component, which today we call developmental lifespan. So that has undergone 3 different main titles. That section of psychology. So first it was child psychology, and that's a very old term. And then they went on to developmental psychology, because in child psychology it's all about how the child develops, what happens at each one of those developmental stages. And then later on that field changed to look at the whole lifespan, not just, children, okay? So now we call it lifespan psychology, okay? Oh yeah, we're in my den today because it's too hot on the deck. And the den is a comfortable 62 degrees. We're outside, it's in the 90s. So if you hear some noise in the background, that's just the air conditioner. So when we look at lifespan psychology, we're talking about how do children and adults learn, think, speak, behave, what changes occur at what age group, what milestones do they reach, all of those sorts of things. Is it tied to a particular time? Do some people reach those milestones the same time or not the same time as others, and what does that all mean? So your social group and the things that you hear and the things that you learn throughout your life stick with you sometimes. So you always think of something in a certain way because you experience that particular way, as a kid or as an adult or in your particular social or economic group or something like that. I'll give you an example. When my kid So my kid has two parents, and we're both from Massachusetts. So we both have that Massachusetts accent that everyone tells us we have. But anyway, so she was doing essays at school, and she was writing about what you would call a dresser, we call a bureau, her bureau drawer. And she spelled it consistently, D-R-A-W, drawer. The drawer, you know, the drawer. The teacher kept saying, why do you keep writing drawer? And she was like, well, that's the way you spell it. And the teacher said, no, it's D-R-A-W-E-R, drawer, 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 whatever it is. And she got into an argument with the teacher, like, no, it isn't, it's drawer. But see, she learned it that way, and she learned it because she heard us talking that way, and that's what she always learned. My sister, when we were growing up, my grandfather always talked about his sister, so my great aunt, and he always called her a Portuguese name, Berderca. And Berderca in Portuguese means crazy, crazy lady. And when she came to the United States from Portugal, my sister went running up to her and said, hi, Berderca, hi, Berderca. And she was like, why is this child calling me crazy? It was really great. But anyway, so that's two cultural examples for you, okay? Another thing that we look at during lifestyle is, what are the things that you remember as a child, okay? What are some things in your childhood that stand out? Like, what is your earliest memory? Some researchers say that children don't really have good memories before the age of 3, and that they remember things because they were either told the story over and over again in family gatherings, or they saw pictures and someone explained to the kid, hey, remember this picture? This picture was when blah, 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 blah happened, and that's how the kid learned about it, and then the kid has incorporated that into their memory. So memory is a fickle thing. I want you to think about that. The other thing is that, which is a good thing, they say that young children won't be able to have good memories of trauma, especially if it happened before age 3. And there's a whole bunch of research in sexuality, which is a part of psychology, about how to help children about circumcision. And there was actually a study that was done where during circumcision they took one of those pacifiers and they dipped it in sugar, and when they were actually performing the circumcision, the baby started sucking on it harder and got a taste of sugar, and the recovery time was much better. This is also true for surgeries as a young child and memory and traumatic memory. So very interesting, and there's a lot of different research that's out there. I'm going to put a song on, a link to a song for you to sit there and listen to and think about the words that the singer is saying. It has to do with memories, okay? There's something that happens in trauma that in psychology we call disassociation. And that is when the person is experiencing something that's really traumatic and they kind of pull away from the situation. If you've ever been in a car accident and it's going to be really traumatic, it's just those seconds before the accident, before maybe two vehicles collide, when everything starts to go in slow motion. It doesn't only have to be car accidents, it can be any trauma. When you go in slow motion, that is your mind trying to slow down the process, because you know it's going to be traumatic, you're having an emotional response, and you're trying to understand it at the same time. So your mind slows it down so that you grasp the understanding of it. And we call that disassociation. It's a thing. It's a real thing. And it helps you cope with the trauma that you're going through. There's also a term that we use called suppression. If the memory is going to be too traumatic and too intense, that we tend to suppress it and remove it from our conscious stream of thought because it's going to be too traumatic to think about. So there's that as well. We also have differentiations in psychology between what is healthy memory and what is not healthy memory. So remember in the last video that I made when we talked about how memory, which is good and bad, works good and bad, helps the species to survive. Like your amygdala says, oh hey, here's something good here. Here's where all the good food is. Please remember this place, and you store a memory for it. The bad things, so your memory is always working to help you survive. However, there are times when you remember bad things and you can't forget them, okay? So you have bad things and you remember that, last time I ate this plant, it made me sick, or last time I ate this animal, it made me sick, so I'm not going to eat it again. So sometimes your memory system is gearing you to remember these things, but sometimes that's not a good thing. You're trying to forget something that's very traumatic, and your whole memory system is reminding you of it. Okay, so we call that decay, the normal process of forgetting something which you don't really need. It's not important. Your attention isn't being directed to it, and it's healthy for you to lose memory. Decay in its extreme form, when you really forget about something that you should pay attention to, like trauma, that's called suppression. Okay, so I had a student in the psychology of violence and aggression class, and he was a veteran. He had come back from Afghanistan, and he was talking about his PTSD, and this is an example of when your memory is not letting you forget very traumatic events, and this is something he really struggled with. He was on patrol in Afghanistan, and every day there would be this little girl in a pink dress who would stand up, and she would watch the Americans, in their caravan go by. And what she did was she reported to the Afghanistan people who wanted to get the Americans their exact location and when they were coming and things like that. And so his commanding officer told him and his whole platoon to just shoot her, just shoot this kid. She was like 5 or 6 years old, and he had kids that age, and he just couldn't do it. And then he didn't do it. Nobody in the platoon could kill this little girl. They just couldn't bring themselves to do it. And then what happened was she would tell where the Americans were, and then IEDs and everything else, they would suffer the consequences. So it caused him a great emotional trauma because he couldn't bring himself to kill the little girl, but he knew that if he killed her, then he could save his comrades. And they were all experiencing trauma. So that's an example, a really good example of how not being able to forget will torment you for a long time. So that's really something. Okay, I'm going to stop that here, and then we're going to continue on the next video. So this is part 1 of lecture 2.